All right, welcome back to Courtotberfest Weekly. I'm John Courtot, and Happy New Year. As you can see, we're back in the kitchen and ready to talk about all the random stuff that I watched this week. We've got three new movie reviews, and then a Hellraiser discussion in for the last half. So for movie reviews, I'm going to start with Avatar: The Way of Water, which I did go to see at the beginning of the week. And honestly, so the three new movies that I saw this week were Avatar: The Way of Water, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and Megan. And the fact that I can't aggressively encourage people to go to Avatar, whereas the other two I would absolutely say or must see, speaks a lot for it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Avatar because obviously it is absolutely stunning to look at. It is second to none in regards to visual spectacle, and especially it's IMAX 3D or nothing on this movie. If you're not seeing it in IMAX 3D, there's not really a point of going to the theater to see it. Because narratively, a lot of it is just, it's more of the same. It's the same themes from the first one, albeit, I think, with better character pieces in it. I like that this one is really focused in on Jake and Neytiri's family, and that aspect of it is really good. And they do some fun stuff with the kid, the characters of his children, and they get into shenanigans that they make choices that children would actually make. So that I liked the family aspect to it. The problem is this movie is just aggressively long. We talked about running time a couple episodes ago. And again, this movie is 3 hours and 15 minutes long. And I want to say if it was 45 minutes shorter, I probably would be praising it to the moon. Because again, you've never seen anything like it. It's insane the stuff that James Cameron is capable of doing, especially the last third. The final finale action sequence is absolutely incredible. The stuff that it's doing with this boat sinking while they're fighting on it while it's going down. It's really cool. It's just by the time that you get there, you're just waiting for it to be over. And the theater I was in, you had people getting up and going to the bathroom and whatnot. So it's a lot to take in. And if you're not into 3D and you're just watching it for narrative, I would skip it. If you've got like a 65-inch TV at home, you can chunk through it over the course of a couple days rather than having to sit through it in one. I mean, you can. I'm a big Lord of the Rings guy. You can have 3-hour movies. Return of the King is 3 hours and 20 minutes long, and I have no problem sitting through it. But that movie really moves. This one moves sort of at the start and at the end, and the middle sort of starts to drag, and the visuals just aren't enough. They're just not enough to carry that running time, and the narrative isn't. It would be a fantastic 2.5 hour movie. Cameron overindulges by about, I would say, 45 minutes. So I would argue it depends how much you want to be a part of the conversation and if you want to see the spectacle. If you're really into the spectacle of it, absolutely go see it in IMAX 3D. It will not disappoint. There is some really solid action in it, and I found the narrative stronger than the first one because it was less a direct ripoff of Dances with Wolves, and it's same themes, but it's just a little bit more. It felt a little bit more. What's the words I'm looking for here? It's less of a ripoff. But again, you're going to get all of the same themes. I do a couple of interesting notes. It does obviously have the heavy environmental message, but Cameron does he's putting the story further enough out front that it doesn't feel too obnoxious. And it's pro environment in sort of a general way, whereas basically we can all get behind everybody wants a nice planet and so on and so forth. And one just I will point out interesting thing in terms of one of the actors bringing Stephen Lang back in Avatar form. I don't know that it works when I see Stephen Lang in a movie. I want to see him in his sort of curmudgeon face, and he's just his physical person is what you want to see. He's obviously has that great voice behind him, but also I physically want to see him, and hiding him behind a big blue puppet essentially didn't really work. So Avatar just gets a mild recommend if you have 4 hours to spare and you really want to be a part of the conversation and see the spectacle. And the spectacle will not be just shut my text messaging off. But it is absolutely worth it to. If IMAX 3D, it is absolutely stunning if you have the patience for it. Again, especially the last hour. But if you're looking for a couple of movies that I really heavily recommend, firstly, if you're got a family, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is just a wonderful movie. It's a really tight story about how that we ultimately only it plays on obviously the cats have 9 lives and Puss is down to his last one, and it's a really tight narrative about learning to appreciate the one life that you have and not to waste it. It's got all of that sort of mildly off color humor that the Shrek universe has that's known for, and Puss in Boots is just a really fun character to watch on screen, and it's sort of this story of him. It's like, I can get this wish and get my lives back, and in the middle, it's a race against a couple of other factions trying to get it, and then to get the wish. But then at the same time, you've also have this wild card of the Shrek version of the Grim Reaper is literally out to get him, because he figures you wasted the other 8 lives. I'm just cutting right to the gist, and I'm taking you out right now because you clearly don't appreciate it. So it's a really heartwarming story, and it's well worth your time. It was absolutely delightful, and it was a huge improvement over the first Puss in Boots standalone film. The first one was fine. It's been a while since I've watched it, but it didn't really leave any lasting impact. This one actually stays with you. And I didn't see it in 3D, and I should have, because they do some really interesting creative stuff with the animation stylistically. So if it's still playing in 3D near you, check it out in 3D, because I feel like I missed out on that front by not seeing it in 3D. New character to love in the Shrek universe, Perito, the little dog, is an absolutely perfect addition to the cast. And he works really well because he's in an integral way to the emotional narrative. The backstory of this dog is he has absolutely if any of these characters has reason to want to wish, it's this character. He's legitimately had a rough go of it, yet he looks glass half full, optimistic, happy, and he sees the bright side of everything, which is a great contrast to all of these characters desperately, sort of selfishly trying to get their hands on a wish. So they all play really well off of each other, and Antonio Banderas clearly really loves this character of Puss in Boots, and I hope they keep going. And there's some great sort of Shrek Easter eggs in there, and the sort of last final shot in the film. I really kind of, I would if I would not mind if they made a Shrek 5. It actually made me, I left the theater like, God, I hope they get Michael Myers back and Eddie Murphy, and just get the gang back together for one big sort of fifth Shrek movie. And it's a pretty strong universe that they've created here, with the exception of, I would say, Shrek the third is a little lame, but on the whole, very strong. And Last Wishes, I think, that's a must see. Particularly if you have a family, it is a must see. And again, an hour and 45 minutes, and it tells, I think, I would say, as big an emotional story as Avatar did, but it did it in more than half the time, like less than half the time. Excuse me. So it's a really breezy, an easy breezy watch, and it's really fun. And go check it out. So the third new movie that I saw this week, I actually just got out of it yesterday, is Megan, which is also fantastic. It is a fantastic horror film. It's sort of a PG-13 rated horror film, so it's got a broad range of people who can go. It's not super R rated, but it's legitimately scary because there's actually it has a message to it, but it's a very general message for all of us as a human race. It's not the sort of political messages that they like to throw in now. This is a general in the best of sci-fi for all of us, and it's legitimately scary because of the actual real world implications that are brought up in the film. There's essentially, if you've seen the trailer, this woman her sister dies, and now she has to take custody of her niece, and this is, career woman who doesn't know anything about taking care of her kid, and her solution is essentially pass it off to technology to do, which is kind of an actual world problem that we have. It's very much a commentary on farming out parenting to technology and to screens, and the negative results that has. And what it does really well is show how the technology affects the overuse of technology affects the child. And of course, you get the artificial intelligence that sort of bubbles up with this doll, and you sort of, at the end of it, it's sort of like a Terminator movie, a Terminator sequel that we never got. The end is great. It uses humor really well, and very worth your time. And the thing that I really love is, very clearly, it is a practical effect with CG flourishes. It's very clearly they have a person in costume with some sort of prosthetic puppetry over them. And then I think it looks like probably the eye blinking, that's probably computers, and some of the facial expressions of this doll are computer enhanced, but it looks, I would guess, it looks predominantly practical, which is fantastic. Because it felt very, very tangible. So this movie is well worth your time. I would say it's the first must-see movie of 2023. It's scary. It's got some humor in there, and it has a solid message for all of us. So I definitely go check it out. All right. So before I get into the Hellraiser of it all. There was one more movie that I saw that was not a new movie. This is one that I missed. It came out in, I believe, 2000. I'm on a little kind of horror movie kick right now. Hollow Man with Kevin Bacon, and it's a very solid. It is a very, very solid sort of. It's not a direct adaptation of The Invisible Man, but it's doing The Invisible Man, and utilize, even for 2000, it utilizes effects in fantastic ways, and particularly with when it comes to sort of using water and steam with an invisible person. Um, some really cool visuals. Kevin Bacon is at maybe his most maniacal. It's directed by Paul Verhoeven, so anything Paul Verhoeven does is sort of ratchet it up to 11. But it really it's creepy because first of all, the Invisible Man was always my favorite Universal horror monster, and as an update on that, it sort of shows all of the horrific ways that somebody becoming invisible would be really, really scary. And it's an interesting question of that. There's always the idea of like, they take the juice, they become invisible, and it drives them crazy. And I think it's an interesting question to ask with these movies: is it that they go crazy, or is it that human nature, if you were given the ability for people not to see you, would you just is it something just anyone do, and less a madness and more given the opportunity would we do these evil things? And it still works. The Invisible Man formula very much works. And Hollow Man from 2000, Kevin Bacon, it's got a 30-year-old Josh Brolin in it, which is it's weird because he's 30, but he somehow still looks like I don't know if it's been so many years later, but he really looks like a baby. But he's great in it. Kevin Bacon is great in it. It's got a good score from Jerry Goldsmith, who I miss a lot. His scores were always quite wonderful. But yeah, so if you're looking for an old horror movie, Hollow Man, excellent. It's very, I would say, a solid 3.5 out of 5. It's a really fun movie. Check it out. So, all right, so on to Hellraiser. So, I do have a little bit of a book review first, because basically this was my Christmas reading list, oddly enough. Maybe not entirely appropriate for the holidays, but I was walking around Barnes and Noble in the horror section, and I found the book, The Hellbound Heart. And one of my old friends is really, really huge Hellraiser fan. I had only seen the first movie, and I had never read the book. I've never read any Clive Barker. So I was just thinking about my friend, and I was like, this is short. I need some reading material. Let's see how the book is. And at that point, I had seen the first and the second movie 4 or 5 years ago. So I just want to see how it translates. And the book is great. It's just very engaged. First, obviously, I'm a very, very slow reader, so I love short books are good for me. It's very short and very, very pulpy, and it's just this really, really great, just gothic. It's like this twisted romance between Frank and Julia, and I was surprised at how little of. Obviously everyone remembers the Cenobites in terms of visuals from the movies, but they really only factor in for a little bit in the beginning and a little bit at the end. The rest of it is really very much about this twisted romance between this absolute derelict and this woman who will do anything to get out of this marriage she doesn't like. And what's the strength of the book is in the characters. They're all very grounded. Despite all the supernatural stuff happening, they're grounded, realistic characters. And in terms of, so I read the book. If you're not so into horror, I wouldn't recommend it. And I know plenty of people who aren't. Definitely a must read if you are into horror, and I would just generally recommend it to anyone, because it's a scary, creepy, sort of gross, morality tale about the end result. If all you seek out is if all you're seeking out is pleasure, it doesn't lead anywhere good. And I think like there are two scenes that I really would highlight is the very beginning. It's sort of the a broader version of what's in the movie when Frank opens the puzzle box, and this really cool concept that I don't think back in the '80s they would have been able to depict in movies. Of they just the Cenobites show up and he like I want the pleasure you're offering me, and then they just inundate basically the concept is they heighten all of his senses to an extreme degree, and he can't handle it. And then they sort of drag him into hell, and that's sort of the jumping off point for the whole story. And I just do appreciate that as soon as that starts happening, his inner monologue is essentially like, "Oh my God, I have made a huge mistake." And that's sort of the end result of a life lived. He's this absolute derelict of a human, and his choices lead him there. And then, of course, we go on, and Rory and Julia move in. We have the incident with the blood, and sort of, he sort of manages to get out of hell, and she needs to murder people to get him to regenerate into full form, and it's really creepy. It's really, really creepy. And I also like the ending of the book is a little different than the movie, and I kind of like I like the ending to the book a little bit better. And this is where we'll get into a little spoilery territory here. The Kirsty character goes through the events of the book. The house comes down, and ultimately the Cenobites leave the cube with her, and it's this cool concept if she can see the souls of Frank and Julia reflected in the cube. So they're stuck in hell. But she can't see Rory, who was Julia's husband, who she had a thing for, and was a genuinely good man. So it sort of ends with this, okay, he's not in hell, which means it sort of leaves open the idea if hell is here, there is also a heaven. And if you're a decent human being, you do end up someplace. It's sad that he's gone, but you end up someplace that's better. But excellent book, and check it out. I definitely would like to read more of Barker's work. His descriptions are great. It puts a real clear picture in your mind of what's going on, and I think it's a great piece. Which leads me into the adaptation factor of I did see the movie first, and you have this frequent saying of the book is better, the book is always better, and I do think that's true. It's when you're reading a book, you're a director in your own mind. You're making a movie in your own head, and it's how you would see the movie or make the movie, and that's not going to be who. Somebody else is going to maybe make a different, do it differently than you would do. So it's very, very hard. It's improbable. I would say it's improbable to get a movie that's better than the book. I'm sure there's some out there, but that's, I would say, a rarity. Most of the time, the book is always going to be better, and you have to, if you've read the book and you're going into a movie, you have to go into it with a grain of salt, knowing that this is probably not gonna be exactly what I'm looking for. That being said, there are good adaptations and bad adaptations, and the key really is how well did you capture the spirit of the book, rather than does every single bulletless thing happen from the book in the movie, because that can be its own problem. If you try too hard to cram everything into it, you got to know what to cut. They're two different mediums. But go into the movie knowing that it's probably not going to be exactly how you pictured it in your head, because you're making that movie. That's the movie you're making when you're reading the book. So I definitely, as it's sort of a thing I ask myself: do I read the book, or do I just see the movie? I think the more you read, the better off that you are. I'm not a huge reader, and I wish that I was more of a reader. So I do advocate, and I try my best to, if there's something I really want to see that's based on a book, I try to read the book. Don't always succeed, but I very much advocate for reading the books. But also, when you see the movie, keep in mind just keep in mind it's probably not going to be exactly spot on to what you want. But that being said, Hellraiser is an exceptional adaptation of this book, and it probably helps that the guy who wrote Barker, who wrote the book, wrote and adapted his own work for the movie. But essentially, what's in the book is the movie. It's one of the closest. It's one of the closest. It's one of the closest adaptations I've ever seen. They're the same thing with some few exceptions. Given the technology of the time, definitely some of the descriptions in the book they would not have been able to do with the Cenobites at the beginning and the end. They wouldn't have been able to do it with the technology they had available. That being said, they get really darn close, and I'm very glad that movie was made in the 80s and not now, because if it was now, you'd have a lot of CG nonsense. And the practical effects that they do in that first Hellraiser movie are phenomenal. The makeup, there's some stop motion stuff that you've got going on there. And I think they were really served, the film was really served by being that practical. And it isn't. I will say one thing. The interesting thing going back to the book is there's no. Pinhead is only mentioned one. Pinhead is very much a creation of the films, not the films, not the book. I mean, the character is in the book described in a very different way, and it's only brought up once. It's more of really a background than a foreground character. And in the movies, he became a foreground character largely because he's the one design that could actually still talk through the prosthetics, and Doug Bradley gives an incredible performance. The others, so they're a little constrained by effects, but the other I would say major change from the book to the movie is that in the book, Kirsty is a family friend who has a thing for Rory, who becomes Larry in the movie. And they changed her from family friend to a daughter. And that, I think, was a really smart move, because there's a lot more explanation in the book with her being a family friend that would have been a little bit. You make her a daughter, and it's like father, daughter, they love each other. There's basically everybody understands the father-daughter relationship going on, and there's a lot of explanation that you can immediately not have to worry about, and that I think was a really good change. But it is a fantastic horror movie, made even better by Christopher Young's score. It's got this just creepy orchestral score that just screams hell. It's a must watch. When I had initially watched it 4 years ago, and I rewatched it this week, like I had always thought like, oh, torture porn, and it's not that at all. It's really this twisted, gothic, grotesque romance between these two horrible people who end up paying for it in the end. And the first one, great movie. And so this week I got through the first 6 of them, and it's in. With horror franchises, I think it's always a question. It's a question of when, not if, it descends into schlock. And this one, I think, makes it 2 movies in before immediately devolving. Hellraiser 2 still basically has the spirit of the first film. I enjoyed it. It's just it's not as focused, and it doesn't have that visceral relationship that you had with Frank and Julia. Frank and Julia are sort of the glue for the whole thing. And that element isn't really there. They bring Julia back and do some cool. They basically make her an outright. She is an outright villain in the first one, but they sort of broaden her out to be like even more of a big bad. She's like the big bad in the sequel, and that was kind of cool. They still have sort of that practical makeup stuff going on, and they sort of expand out on what hell is, what goes on there. The one confusing thing, and I haven't quite. Maybe somebody in the comments can let me know one way or the other, but I was under the impression that there was only one cube. It seemed like in the second one there was more than one, so that was a little confusing. So it starts to, I think, confuse itself a little bit, but it still basically has the same spirit of the first one, and it's worth your time. I would watch 1 and 2. One of the first 2 were the ones that I would recommend. It goes off the rails in the third one, because in the third one they lose the thread of what Pinhead is. The third one, they try to turn him into Freddy Krueger. Basically, the less Pinhead talks, the better. Basically, his lines need to be as few as possible, and they need to be really pointed and poignant. They turn him into. It felt Hellraiser 3 feels a lot like Nightmare on Elm Street 2, where they sort of stupidly bring Freddy, into the real world, and he's, doing the slasher thing in the real world, and it doesn't quite work. It's sort of a similar thing. They sort of give him this maniacal laugh, and like, we're gonna do a bunch of slasher stuff. He like wipes out an entire club of people for reasons. And what I kind of don't like about it is in the book they do kind of have a code, and you get the sense in the first one that there is the Cenobites do actually have a code. And what's great about in the book, Kirsty makes a deal and they stick to the deal. They don't go back on it. And this Hellraiser 3 just sort of depicts him as, as just a basic slasher, and he's not a basic slasher. It's not like, say, Freddy or Jason, where it's sort of, they whack the horny teenagers. And that's it's sort of like, those are sort of like, oh, you teenagers, you get up to trouble, they're gonna get you. And it's almost like the slashers is a threat to prevent people from engaging in behavior that you don't want. Pinhead I look at as a consequence. Like, you've already made the decisions, and the decisions are on you, and he's just executing the decisions. And that's where I think Hellraiser 3 doesn't. He's a little bit more active in like killing all of the people who don't within the narrative don't really deserve it. It's just he's whacking people just to whack them, rather than as a result of behavior that they've engaged in. But I'll speed this up a little bit. Hellraiser 4 is insane. When you're out of ideas, you send them to space. It's just an awful movie. It's got this weird frame. It makes no sense. They're trying to explore the creation of the Hellraiser cube, which is an interesting idea, but it's just in this silly context of there's this frame narrative in space where the guy who invented the cube, his like super descendant, is still trying to close the gates of hell that is his ancestor from the 18th century France. It's like we're all over the place. We're in space in the future. We go back to 18th century France, then we go to 1996 when the movie came out, and it's just very, very silly. Very silly, very hard to follow, and it's directed by the dreaded Alan Smithy. Which, for those who don't know, Alan Smithy, if you see directed by Alan Smithy, it means the production was a cluster fun, and the guy who directed it didn't want his name on it, so they pull off his name and they insert Alan Smithy. So if you ever see Alan Smithy directed by, you know it's going to be bad. And oh boy, Hellraiser 4, I'm not a fan. Not a fan. Hellraiser 5 is when it starts to get straight to video. You can it's more cohesive than the fourth one, but you can tell they just had some dirty cop detective script lying around the office somewhere, and they just inserted some supernatural stuff and bookended it with a little bit of Pinhead and called it a movie because we got to make the movie, we got to hold on to the rights, man. But interesting fact on that one, directed by Scott Derrickson, who went on to do Doctor Strange. And it's okay. There's some very evocative imagery that Derrickson puts into it, and it's well acted. It's a well constructed movie. It's the type of movie where you, as a director, you're making it to prove that you can get a product from stage one to stage, you can bring it to A to B to C and get it out to where it needs to go. And it's a similar thing with Hellraiser 6. It's fine. Like, both of these movies are fine, but you can tell they brought in Doug Bradley for like maybe a couple of days, because Pinhead is in very little of both of these movies. I liked 6 a little bit better than 5 because it brings back Kirsty from the first two, and that was fun. Although they don't really integrate any of the actual plot points from the first two into it, which was weird. I mean, that's where I would have gone. The one thing that I don't like about 6 that they do with her character is that she basically sacrifices 5 people to Pinhead to save herself, which seems a little weird. And all of them had negative aspects to... These 5 people had negative aspects to their personality, but they don't deserve to be sacrificed to hell. So that I had a little bit of a problem with, but it's an all horror, like slasher franchises are they're fun. I mean, it's not for everybody. Again, the first two, I would say you have to be committed. I really like the first 2 movies, and I would full on recommend the first 2 movies to folks. If you go farther than that's really, it's a question of how much you're into it and whether or not you're committed, because it's a lot of straight to video schlock. And again, it just it goes very immediately over the cliff and loses all the threads that make it. And then especially once you lose Christopher Young's score, it just doesn't feel right anymore. And yeah, it's 1 and 2, and then if I must, I must. And you can continue on from there if you're really interested. I'm glad I'm on. Hellraiser 1 and 2 I will buy and add to my DVD collection. 3 and on, I'm glad I've watched them. It's been an interesting cultural experience. I don't need to see any of them ever again after that. But that is my little Hellraiser discussion right there. And I do want to end with one final message, because I did get out of Megan yesterday, and this is a little just theater etiquette lesson for people out there. Don't bring babies to movies. I swear to God, somebody brought a baby to the movie. There was a baby in the movie theater. And the baby, because obviously, I'm not going to blame the baby. The baby doesn't know what the heck is going on. And so, yeah, the kid is crying and making noise and distracting the rest of the theater for the entirety of this thing. But let's see. My laptop is being weird. There we go. But just don't do it. Like, if you want to go out to a movie, get a babysitter. I mean, my God. It's really incredibly rude, and I had a similar thing happen on Joaquin Phoenix Joker, of like, why is that 5-year-old in this R-rated movie? They're not here because they're interested, they're here because you want to see this movie, and you're not willing to, either wait to DVD or find a babysitter, and it's rude. It is really, really rude and disrespectful to the audience. So just don't do it. Don't do it. For the love of God, leave your baby at home with either a babysitter or a grandparent, or like it's just like you like ripping your hair out. Like why would you do this? And the other thing, obviously, cell phones. There were quite a few cell phones whipped out in the movie last night. Don't turn the cell phone off. Turn it off. Like it is. You're watching a movie and everybody else wants to watch the movie too. So please don't do it. All right. Well, I'm gonna wrap it up for today. That was what I watched this week. We'll be back next week with. I actually don't know. I'm definitely gonna take a Hellraiser break. It's been a little bit too much time in hell over the last week. So I'm probably gonna do a 180. And pick some other stuff for the week, but we'll see how that goes. And have an excellent week. I hope you're having a good start to 2023, and I'll see you next time.